The title of my presentation, Dietary Guidelines for Americans. But I think the one that at least you and probably you will be is, are they worth the trouble? So that's what we are going to focus on the second aspect, besides presenting the report of the committee that I was the privilege to be serving. Okay. New dietary guidelines are released every 5 years to promote health and to prevent disease. This is an exercise that is done in the US, and many other countries also have dietary guidelines. They don't have such a regimented system like here in the US that it has to be by mandate, federal mandate, every 5 years, but we're not unique in that issuing dietary guidelines. But if you pay attention to this slide, at the bottom says but, and that is anything that is in brown or in this color is the one that I want to emphasize. So, is the process valuable to Adventists? I mean, what is the relevance of dietary guidelines for Americans to us Adventists? Don't we have already enough knowledge of nutrition? Why should we pay attention to dietary guidelines? Well, there are several issues that and I titled this SDA or DJA. You know, SDA is the acronym in English for Seventh-day Adventists. So it's 3 letters, so I wanted to contrast with DGA. So SDA or DGA. From the beginning of our church, to be exact, in 1863, Ellen White got a vision, and from there started the health message, the health reform, and gave us specific dietary guidelines, among guidelines on many other issues, but specifically on dietary guidelines. These are part of the ethos of our church and have become principles by which many of us live, and we follow. Many, probably not all, but many of the guidelines that has been nicely, I would say, accepted or presented in the book Counsels on Diets and Health. That was not an original book of Ellen White, but was just a compilation that done in the 1930s to be, and it has been used as a textbook for dietetic students at Loma. So, if these guidelines were from the Spirit of God, what do we have to learn new, or what do we have to learn from the dietary guidelines for Americans? I think these are relevant questions that we have to, at least personally, I had to face these questions, and I'm sure that some of you have some similar. So, in the 1860s, the science of nutrition was not well known and was not well developed. As a matter of fact, the formal science of modern nutrition started not so many years earlier than this year when the Adventist Church was founded. As nutrition science grows, will Mrs. White's guidelines be affirmed? Are the dietary guidelines moving towards the Seventh-day Adventist viewpoint or away from them? And here I have some typical examples that, at least in my generation, has been addressed. We're not going to address these specific issues. That could be a topic for many other presentations. But the issue of coffee, the issue of alcohol beverages, the issue of nuts, I would say oils, sugar. These are just few issues that, at least in my generation, it has been discussion as far as, the SDA or the DJA. That's what I presented in such a kind of a dilemma sometimes, or such a, what way to follow, one or the other. Okay, and these are my opening thoughts, and I'm going to now go into a more, I was going to say mundane, but that has another word, another meaning in the Adventist Church. I'm going to say something that is less provocative, let's put that way. I'm going to follow, what is the background of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans? Some of you may not be new information. I hope that my student, previous student, Angeline Davis, that's what's her name before, we'll know some of these things, but for some of you may be new. Okay, so the Dietary Guidelines for Americans serves as the cornerstone of the federal nutrition programs and policies, providing what is the food-based recommendations to help prevent diet-related chronic diseases and promote the overall health. They are mandated and to reflect the scientific evidence and that is published, and basically this is now a federal mandate of 2 departments. In the past was only the USDA, but later on it was the Health and Human Services Department. And historically, the Dietary Guidelines were advice for adults, or at least for children 2 years and older. But for this particular edition, they wanted also that we look at pregnant women, lacting women, and children below 2 years old. So that was a novelty of this year. So how we go from the scientific advisory report to the Dietary Guidelines for America. So the advisory committee, the scientific committee, along with the agencies, comments and informs the new edition of the Dietary Guidelines. And the committee that you will see exactly what committee I'm talking, elaborates the scientific report. And this scientific report, and I want to emphasize this, it is not a draft of the Dietary Guidelines. The report provides the review of the current state of the nutrition science, and then based on this report, the Departments of Agriculture and Health and Human Services issue the Dietary Guidelines, develops and then issue the Dietary Guidelines. So the review of the science is done by the advisory committee, and the USDA and the Health and Human Services is the one that nominates the committee. So the committee conducts the independent review and based on the current scientific evidence. And this report was, for this time, is already published, and it was issued, the report, in July of last year. So the work of this committee is called the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report, and you see here a picture of it, is what it was issued. It has not been published on paper and ink, but it has been published on the internet, and that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, based on that, then on this edition, the US Department of Agriculture and the other Department of Health and Human Services is the one that develops and the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And Dietary Guidelines for Americans, that is for the 5 years that is going to cover, from 2020 to 2025, is also already out. And this was made available to the general public in January of this year. So here is the difference between the committee's report and the Dietary Guidelines. And I want to emphasize that because I'm going to focus on what we did as a committee, which is in the green, not so much on blue. So what it is, this is the report that I'm going to talk. Who writes the report? The report I'm going to talk about was written by us. I was the author of, or co-author of 3 chapters of the report. I'm going to mention those to you. However, the guidelines are done by the government. So what are the audiences for this? The audience of this report us is, I would say, the educated audience, I mean, the professionals. But basically, the main audience is the US departments, because these are the ones that we, as an independent committee, advise the departments on how they have to base their decisions as far as making dietary guidelines. And that is who is it used for. And basically, this is the USDA and other persons that can go. Is publicly available, as you will see. However, the dietary guidelines is for the general public and for the federal agencies and for the health professionals that have to either give advice or they have to be used for school programs or many food programs at the federal level. Okay, let's have an overview of the committee that study and did and finally issue the report for the dietary guidelines. The charge by the government to this committee was to examine the evidence on specific topics and scientific questions identified by the department. This year, as opposed to in previous editions, we were given 60 plus questions to really answer. In the past, the committee was even more freer because met the committee, assessed the scientific literature, and the committee set up its own agenda. What things are we going to answer? How are we going to, what progress has been done in the last 5 years, and what needs to be adjusted or changed or modified? This time, that was not the case. And that was somehow a little bit of surprise to me, because I accepted a mandate and I should have done my homework better. And then I was confronted with 65 questions that we had to answer, for which I had nothing to do with these questions. It was, they were done. We could also have come up with more questions, but that means more work. So we came up with just a very few more questions other than the ones that we were given. So, and then we submit the report at the end of 2 years of work. Okay, this is the committee of which I was the privilege to be serving for about a year and a half. And the chair of the committee was Barbara Schneemann, now is retired, but it was is a former emeritus professor at Davis University, but worked for many years at the FDA, the Federal Food and Drug Administration. Anyway, this is just the members of the committee, and then the next pictures shows not only the members of the committee, but also the U.S. Undersecretary for Agriculture and for the Health and Human Services, to show here that the final product of the dietary guidelines is not what the committee says, although they have to be listening carefully. But finally, it's the government that issues the dietary guidelines. So they have the right, to modify our advice or to use partially or not to use at all. This, as you will see, is a much more complex process than reviewing the literature. So the organization of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee was placed into different topics, generic topics. New to this year was to give advice for younger than 24 months. So there were two committees that were somehow new, that is the pregnancy and lactation and the birth to 24 years. The others examine things that previous years has been done, but we had to address the new literature. Dietary patterns, I was member of this subcommittee. Beverages and sugars, dietary fats and seafoods, I was member of this one. There was also a frequency of eating, and there was other committees such as data analysis and food pattern modeling. Probably they put me in the dietary patterns because 5 years ago, the previous dietary advisory committee came up with food patterns as the way to move in the future, and they recommended 3 healthy food patterns, one being the Mediterranean, the other one being the vegetarian, and the other one a healthy American diet, whatever it is, a healthy American diet. So given our previous work and publications, and especially dissemination of scientific knowledge in vegetarian diets, I had previously been a member of the USDA Food Patterns Committee about 7 years ago, and they decided to invite me to do most probably for the expertise on vegetarian diets. And then given my previous research on nuts, which are very high in fat, that's probably what they put me on this other committee on dietary fats and seafood. Okay, what is the scope of the dietary guidelines? The committee used a wide range of health outcomes based on this, and also aspects that goes beyond the scientific literature or the published literature. And here are the 3 aspects. One is as far as to examine the evidence. It was data analysis on data already gathered by the government. Based on the data that we had, it was doing food pattern modeling to see what type of foods or nutrients can be accommodated on different patterns and still meet some specifications as far as nutrition adequacy. And also what I spend most of the time, that is doing a systematic reviews of the hundreds and hundreds of papers published on the topics that were assigned to us. So the committee had to answer the questions, as I said, on diet and health, and using one of these 3 approaches. Here we have, as far as data analysis, it was basically data from the NHANES and other sources of the federal government. The food pattern modeling was using the current diet of Americans. How can we modify based on the evidence that for a better health that still meets the nutrients and also that is acceptable to the general public? And the other one is to review the evidence, the NESR approach, in a systematic way that I will be briefly describing. So the committee created the protocol for each question before it examined the scientific evidence, and that's reached the conclusions, and with that made the report. So in addition, there were public comments, and we received 62,000 public comments. I have to say that we were put at our help and disposal a large group of staff that was really working and were the ones that did most of the legwork. As you can imagine, all the members of the committee did not read the 62,000 written comments by the public. I mean, they classified on topics, and then they were given to us, just to the committee, the ones relevant to the committee that we belong. Also, of the 62,000, there were many thousand that were repetition. You were sent by some organizations that is like when you receive a letter, says contact your senator or your whatever, and it's already a pre-letter. So some of them, so they are not unique comments. But yes, they were, if I remember correctly, between 1,000 and 2,000 that were unique comments. Okay. I'm going to spend, and that's probably the most, how am I doing about time?
You're doing fine. We have about 15, 20 minutes.
We are into 15, 20 minutes, or we have still 14, 20 minutes more to go? We
have 15 to 20 minutes more to go.
So then I'm going to skip some of these quickly because I want to spend time in basically this is the a systematic review approach that is called nutrition evidence, developed by the USDA. It had some, any systematic review methodology is not perfect. There is none that is perfect and has plus and cons. Basically, this is what it says. You have the question. Based on the question, then there is a search for the studies. Then the data is extracted and then is synthesized, and then is trying to answer the question and then make the recommendation. The issue is that the answering the question and grading the question is based on the members of the committee. And every member, has an agenda, and including myself. I thought I was there with an agenda. I don't want to say that I had no bias. So it's a systematic review, but still there is some degree of subjectivity. But being different members coming from different persuasions and different things, makes things transparent and clear, but not necessarily perfect. But it's much better than many other reviews of the literature or non-systematic reviews. Okay. The advisory committee established all the aspects of this protocol and had to follow this protocol. And we had to address the articles that relates to the population of interest. We have to do whether the study was an intervention or exposure, or was just an observational, and then go into the outcomes, definition of terms, and all of these. This sounds very simple, but it takes more time. What the studies are going to be included and what are going to be excluded because they don't meet the criteria. And after that, we did the analysis, the results, and basically to assess potential bias, the funding source, so on and so forth. And here we have some of the things that we did, assess on all the papers that we examined, how strong, moderate, or limited evidence. That's the way that we had to do at the end. And then this was addition is besides the objective results by the risk of bias, by the consistency, directness, precision, and generability of the body of the literature that we were examining. Okay. In the sake of time, I'm going to skip a few slides because I don't think it's necessary to go. But I want to say that as far as the data analysis, more than 150 analyses were done. As far as the food patterns, and we did for the 3 diet models, which are the vegetarian, the Mediterranean, and the healthy. And also, we analyzed as a group, not myself, 270,000 citations and more than 1,500 original research that were included, and the 33 original systematic reviews to answer the questions that were given to us. And I want to say that based on this, the committee looked across all the conclusions and statements and gave advice to the USDA, and were the departments the one that finally issued the dietary guidelines. The only thing that we did is issue the report, the scientific report. And here I want to say, the public comments that we receive are not only from the public in general, or the motivated public, and that is in parentheses, my words, includes the food industry. So the food industry really has a lot of comments, as far as the different issues that were addressed. So based on the comments of the public and based on our dietary guidelines, they are going to, the government issues this. And that, I repeat this slide. From now on, what I'm going to present is things as far as the scientific report, which is the committee. The dietary guidelines, although I would say very closely follow most of our conclusions, not in every case. And for this, this is beyond the control of the committee. And I'm not going to now talk about the dietary guidelines, but I'm going to talk about the what the committee concluded and what is the advice of the committee to the government as far as including the dietary guidelines. The report has been published online and is available to everyone to see, and it has many chapters, and here are the specific chapters of the report that you can see. And I'm going to now very briefly, but I think I distill the relevance, especially for us adults, on what are the conclusions of our scientific report. That is, I would say, the state of the scientific evidence as far as what should we eat. So there are chapters, as I said, on different issues that are listed here. And here we have, as far as findings that we have. One is that the American dietary landscape has not changed appreciably over time. So despite almost 40 years of dietary guidelines, the diet pattern of the average American changed, fortunately, in the good direction, but very slowly. Across the lifespan, the typical diet of Americans consume results in overconsumption of energy, total calories, saturated fat, sodium, added sugars, and for some consumers, alcoholic beverages. Intakes of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are lower than current recommendations. That's what we found. American children 1 year and older underconsume foods with vitamin D, calcium, dietary fiber, and potassium. So this is just looking at the data that the federal government, on a systematic way, collects. Here it is. How healthy is the American diet? As you can see here, only 56% to 60, and now is in the 60s, follows the index of the healthy eating index. So this is an index created by the federal government that, being 100, is following the dietary guidelines, and that is expressed in a percentage. As you can see in this slide, the healthy eating index is more it has a U shape. At the beginning of life, 61, and at the older adults, elderly, is 64. However, in the middle of life is less, especially on adolescents. This gets the lower of all. I had the privilege to be part of the dietary guidelines for dietary patterns. And this, I have to say with pride, that this table that is in the committee, it was my idea, and it clearly shows, the connection that exists, for instance, between dietary patterns and different health outcomes. In the first column, as you can see here, the first column listed the foods and components of the dietary patterns, and the other columns is the different outcomes: total mortality, cardiovascular disease, growth and development, including overweight, type 2 diabetes, bone and health, colorectal cancer, so on and so forth. And as you can see, fruits and vegetables appear to be protective. That is, dietary patterns associated with lower risk, for doesn't matter what the outcome that we look at. Whole grains appears in all except for neurological health, legumes in almost all, and nuts in many of them. So this is what I insisted we should put as the conclusions, because that says that these food groups seems to be protective. Dietary patterns associated with higher risk of disease are processed meats, high-fat meats, animal source foods, saturated fats. So if you go to the next one, you see that sugarly sweetened beverages and foods, refined grains, and all this also seems to be the ones that are components of the dietary patterns associated with higher risk of these different health outcomes. And I made quite an emphasis on this to be on the report. Here we have dietary patterns. What are the findings? Dietary patterns, this is the wording that as it is verbatim almost. Dietary patterns associated with beneficial health outcomes are characterized by higher intakes of vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, whole grains, vegetable oils, and low or non-fat dairy. And then it says, and fish, poultry, or lean meat if meat is included in the diet. So it doesn't mean that it has to include this, but if it's included, this is the type of flesh foods that are into these healthy dietary patterns. Dietary patterns associated with adverse health outcomes include higher intake of red and processed meats, sugar sweetened foods and beverages, and refined grains. So these are the foods that are components of dietary patterns associated with adverse health outcomes or detrimental health outcomes. So what do we have as far as dietary fats and seafoods? It's interesting the way that the things were conducted, but it was found that saturated fats has to be less than 10%. This threshold was based on previous analysis, not on ours. And dietary cholesterol should be as low as possible. As you know, dietary cholesterol is only exist in animal products. So say that dietary cholesterol should be as low as possible means animal products should be as low as possible. That's equivalent. So 2 or more servings of seafood or fish per week are recommended to ensure, and see what they say, intake of key nutrients and as part of an overall healthy dietary pattern. There was no much evidence to say in nice terms that eating seafood was really related to some of the cognition outcomes that we were trying to see in children and in adults. So the recommendation came up that is because it has key nutrients, and by key nutrients, they specifically relate to omega-3 fatty acids. So based on that, then I tried to add, and that is in the report, that says, what about those that for whatever reason, ethical, sustainable, religious reason, doesn't want to eat seafood? So we included this, as an alternative. For those who do not consume seafood, regular intake of other foods high in omega-3 fatty acids, such as flax seeds, walnuts, soy oil, algae, and eggs that contains omega-3 fatty acids is appropriate. Okay. As far as beverage, committee advice, when nutrient-rich beverages, milk and so on and so forth, are incorporated into the diet, it will be important to mindful of their contribution to the total energy intake. So, low and no calories sweetened beverages may be a useful aid in weight management in adults, recommending the limitation of all these sweet beverages and the role of beverage plays in diet quality and energy balance varies across the lifespan. So we recognize as a committee that having milk as the main source of energy and nutrients when you are a baby is one thing, and having this juicing or sodas or whatever and alcoholic beverages as the main source of energy in an adult is another. So that's the way the is phrased in this way. What specifically was said about alcohol? Overall, alcohol is an unhealthy substance. That's verbatim taken from the report. Can be consumed at low levels with relatively low risk. Drinking less is better for health than drinking more. Evidence suggests that guidelines should be tightened for men in particular. So this is basically part of the discussion in the committee. Sorry, in the body of the chapter. But let's go to how the chapter concludes as far as the recommendations. And here are the three recommendations. Do not begin to drink alcohol or purposely continue to drink because you think it will be healthier. So in other words, if you drink for health, don't drink. There are other reasons to drink, but for health reasons, don't drink. If you drink alcohol, at whatever level, drink less is better than drinking more. So basically saying, if you are a drinker, drink less. And for those who drink alcohol, recommended upper limit for better health is up to 1 drink per day for both men and women. Previous dietary guidelines recommended up to 2 drinks for males and 1 for women. Here, it was found that there is even evidence between 1 and 2 drinks for men that is detrimental. So, I mean, there is evidence that if somebody chooses to drink, not necessarily for health, but I mean for other reasons, not more than 1 drink a day. What about added sugars? Here is a computation of the percentage on the sugars that could be incorporated into the diet and still keeping the different nutrients at an acceptable level as far as adequacy based on healthy choices of foods. In other words, if you choose to follow a vegetarian diet or a healthy American diet or a Mediterranean diet, and you choose always highly nutritious foods out of the groups in every food group, the maximum percentage of added sugars into the diet as far as calories, this is the range. So based on these computations, this is the recommendation. Recommended less than 6% of energy from added sugar to achieve a dietary pattern that is nutritionally adequate while avoiding excess of energy. I have to say that the dietary guidelines, not our recommendation, still use the previous level. I mean, the ones that were issued just by the government of 10%. So this is when there is one example that there was some departure of what it was recommended by the committee versus what the government decided to issue as far as dietary guidelines. Okay, so we're coming to an end. And here is the food patterns, but it's for ages 2 and older. So basically after the weaning process and after the adults, generally nutritionists move on the idea that a child 2 years can sit at the table and eat the same foods that the parents eat. Maybe in different proportions, but I mean, doesn't need any special diet or special foods for children. I mean, that at 2 years and older, you can eat the same foods that the parents should eat. I mean, as far as this. So, first recommendation, continue to recommend the established USDA's food patterns, which are the healthy USDA style, whatever it is, healthy vegetarian, and healthy Mediterranean style. And then, what are the food components of these USDA recommended food patterns? Fruits and vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. Protein and fats should come from nutrient-rich food sources. You see, they don't mention, here, what are the food sources, but this has to be nutrient-rich food sources. Limited amounts of added sugars, solid fats, and sodium. And then discretionary calories, by that we mean added sugars, saturated fats, alcohol, and all these. A small amount of energy remains for additional of these things, but as low as possible. And help the public to continue the shift of dietary intake in healthy directions, including strategies for maintaining energy balance, because one of the major problems in the US that is becoming a global problem is the excess of calories. So the measured dietary advice would be eat less. And then we would say what you have to eat less, but I'm saying eat less, that would be the measured dietary advice. Okay, these dietary guidelines and reports are published, and you can go to dietaryguidelines.gov to get both reports that we are mentioning. And here is, I'm coming to a conclusion. I do think if you see, and some of you have may remember from either college or high school, the asymptotic lines is when two lines tend to approach and they at the infinite they touch. So this is a slide that I took from a presentation I did 15 years ago when I would say doctor and pastor and Umberto Rassi, that was the director of the General Conference Department of Education, invited me to present what are the nutrition views of an Adventist in compare with the, I would say, the Christian or the biblical paradigm. So here we have the bottom line. You have the timeline. I mean, from the 1860s until now. And here we have the views that Adventists had in nutrition, and I say of things that pretty much have not changed over the time. And here in red is the line of the scientific views of nutrition. And I could say that this seems like an asymptotic line that is tending to get in approach, I mean, to the Adventist views as far as the nutrition is concerned. And here we have, that is my closing thought. As science moves closer to our nutrition principles, I think we can learn how to share our important principles with the world. That's all for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sabaté. That was absolutely just such an incredible amount of information. I don't know about any of you, but I sure wish I were back in school again with you, Dr. Sabaté. If anybody has the opportunity to take a class from Dr. Sabaté, you should do it. I'm sure there are several questions that people may have in their minds. I've certainly written down a few of myself. Yes, please, thank you. Okay. And I really appreciated seeing the backstory of how we actually get to the guidelines. Now, before we actually address some questions, we want to give our attendees an opportunity to go into breakout groups and to have some conversation, okay? Because you need to take what you just heard, and now let's talk about how are we going to apply this to our own local church ministry or personal ministry. So you have some breakout group leaders who are going to lead you in conversation on one question. We have about 10 minutes that we're going to take in our breakout groups, and then we're going to come back here and finish up our conversation and also have time for questions. We also have another guest who's going to be sharing some more information with us, so I don't want you to miss out, but we're going to put you into your groups now, and then we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Let's go to our group leaders now, because we want to hear a little bit of the conversations that were had. Our first question was that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a global church. So how do we contextualize the US guidelines when working with individuals from different countries? And we had two groups who were discussing this. And Paul, let's go to your group first.
All right. Yes, this was really a very good question. I was walking this morning when I read that on my phone, and I said, wow, this is amazing. In our group, we, of course, had a very cross-cultural group. So we have dietary guidelines from Canada, from Brazil, from Jamaica. And so now we're looking at the US guidelines, which Dr. Sabaté, thank you very much, because you gave a very good background of how this was developed, which I think was critical for our thinking. Maggie mentioned that we as SDAs have an advantage, and we have the books such as the Ministry of Healing, Councils on Diets and Foods. We have maybe access to good food, and to use this as best we can in any place that we go to help individuals eat the best that they can is important. We may not always have the opportunity to eat in a vegetarian, vegan way. But again, Ellen White was fairly clear that this is not a black and white thing. In Northern Canada, and I mentioned that we had spent some time in Greenland, you do not have the opportunity for fresh fruits and vegetables in the wintertime. And much of the time is winter up there. As Ellen White did, I know with one individual, and Maggie mentioned this too, she said, eat the fish, eat the eggs if that's necessary to keep you alive. There's no definite line on this. Lorraine also mentioned that the ethnicity of the groups that we have around the world enjoy the food that they have. And maybe there's something we can substitute and trade foods. In other words, there's something that they have that actually has the nutritional benefit that we're used to, that we could get it from them. And then, as I often was asked by my students, they said, well, you certainly wouldn't eat this in these countries where we did service projects. And I said, we always eat the best food that is available to us. That doesn't give you license to eat something that is unhealthy. Whatever is the best food available is probably what you have to eat. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Paul. Let's now go to Dr. Lorraine Barton to hear from your group.
Right. We had a very culturally ethnic diversity in our group as well. And I thought two or three of the comments were really good. All of them were. But one of them that I thought was really quite the best was that if you go back 100 years or even just a few years, and in fact, sometimes just recent, all ethnic groups, wherever they are in the world, originally had mostly a plant-based diet, and some still do. So if you talk about going back to their natural way that they used to eat, you know, I've had pictures shown that I use sometimes in meetings that show the Pacific Islanders and how thin their people looked, you know, 100 years ago. And then when they moved to America, you know, the heaviness that they oftentimes come across. And one of our participants who was originally from Mexico said the same thing when he moved to Texas, you know, by just eating the regular American diet, they started to gain weight. But if he goes back to his natural healthy diet that he used to have, and when he wanted to improve his ability to run in marathons, he looked at what the Indians that are the top group, you know, the group that runs so fast down in Peru or whatever, they only eat maize and greens and I think some other vegetables. So going back to our native types of background is helpful, and we can do that in our potlucks in our churches. All the churches have wonderful potlucks. We all miss them. We also discussed, just for a couple of minutes, the fact that the data shows that most of the American population has gained weight during the pandemic. We talked about that and how what are the reasons for that, and including more alcohol, including less exercise, eating more often and more irregularly, eating more comfort foods and stuff like that. So very important that we get back to our regular diets of just plain foods, not eating out so much, not ordering in, etc., like I'm going to do today.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I know you are a strong advocate of the healthy vegetarian diet and our Adventist perspective on that too. So thank you for sharing your insights as well.
Just want to make one more comment on that. Fortunately, the physicians are starting to think this way for babies and newborns, and our emphasis has become extremely, I would say, very strong on encouraging only breast milk for babies. It's getting much stronger than before, saving babies' lives.
Thank you. And as a pediatrician, that is important advice. So let's go to the second group discussion question that we had. And we had two groups here as well. So the question was, should the Adventist Church use the dietary guidelines to determine what food is served at our schools, universities, health institutions, etc.? The group I was in even talked about potluck. Why or why not? And let's go to Pastor Ray first and your group.
Right. We had a good group. And one of the first comments was that we should follow the guidelines, particularly since they are becoming more and more accepted, that the Adventist diet and approach to the food intake and the types of foods is becoming more in line with, or the guidelines are becoming more in line with the Adventist recommendations that we've had for well over 100 years. Shortly after, I might mention that that we had Dr. Sabaté and Dr. Brower both join in on our group, and they had some very important comments. Donnelly Lehman mentioned and basically turned the question on its head, shall we say, and said that we should ask the question, are we following the guidelines that we have? And then the comments that were made concerning that was that we're not doing a very good job, that unfortunately our institutions are basically following the desire of students, and yet, and Dr. Brower, Angeline mentioned that she had a conversation with some of our academies, and the academies are not in a financial position to hire those that are professional dietitians and nutritionists, and that this causes a problem. Many times those who help with the food service are church members that volunteer or are paid a stipend to help out with the food service. And so we had some very good discussion, and we ended with the beginning of a comment as to how we might go about making some changes. Dr. Sabaté was just about to make some final thoughts, and we were cut off. So we had a good time.
Thank you, Ray. And I'm going to ask Dr. Sabaté to share his comment after we hear from the second group. So Carolina, how about your group? Let's hear from you.
Good afternoon. We had a good participation in our breakout, and the overarching response was yes, that we should promote the guidelines in our institutions and schools, etc., but that we need to find a bridge between our own Adventist guidelines, with the dietary guidelines and capitalize on what's positive. And so, for example, especially because some of our institutions, schools receive USDA funding for our low-income students. And so obviously we would not serve something that it goes against our temperance guidelines. And so, for example, pork, etc. And also to emphasize that when it comes to our temperance, that obviously we don't promote alcohol consumption in our church, that we would obviously stay away from the 1 glass per day that's recommended. And that education is key, that we need to be flexible so that our food does not become a burden to our church members or to our students, but a joy. And so that's in a nutshell what we discussed. It was very good participation, like I mentioned, and everyone emphasized the need for us to find common ground between the guidelines and our own.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Wonderful conversations and feedback from everyone. Thank you so much for participating. So Dr. Sabaté, what was that comment that you wanted to share? I think it's well worth all of us hearing about your thought. And we need to unmute.
Okay, in response to the question if our institutions, particularly the schools, have to follow the dietary guidelines, I would say with the particularity of vegetarian diets, which I mean now is very clearly stated in the dietary guidelines, I think we could very safely follow the dietary guidelines. There is the vegetarian food pattern is well established. They have very specific recommendations as far as food guides, as number of servings, so on and so forth. So that could be an easy way, I mean, to do so.
Hey, thank you very much. All right, well, I mentioned we have one more special guest who is going to share with us what is the church doing about this issue of our diet. And, you know, because this is an important thing, I want you to know that the North American Division Health Ministries is making nutrition our focus for this year. And earlier this year, we actually launched a new initiative called The Joy of Eating, which we heard Carolina talk about. We need to remind people about the joy. And we have our host of our Joy of Eating Club, Maggie Collins, with us. Now, Maggie, I want to tell them all about how wonderful and amazing you are, but I want you to actually have the time to share about yourself and the program we're working on. You can all learn about Maggie on our website. So Maggie, thank you so much for dedicating yourself to the field of nutrition and now working with us to bring the joy of eating to our churches and communities.
Well, thank you, Angie, for inviting me. And thank you, Dr. Sabaté, for almost 10 years ago accepting me into the nutrition program. That's the reason I'm here today. So it all goes back in a circle. So it's been a joy to work with Angie into this wonderful initiative called The Joy of Eating. As you all know, eating is a basic need, but it's also something that God created to be joyful. We have taste buds, and God created a variety of delicious and nutritious foods. So I think it's something that we need to explore. And like Dr. Sabaté said, we need to share with the world, you know, that we have this amazing light, we have these amazing results in studies done with Seventh-day Adventist populations in terms of longevity, in terms of, you know, reduced risk for most chronic diseases, you know, I would say all chronic diseases pretty much. So what we are trying to do with this program is to share the science, which is something important as we are trying to share with the world what we believe, but also to give practical tips on how to apply those principles and make them joyful. So one of the things that we do in each of those sessions is to, you know, we start with a lecture, we have breakout sessions, kind of like what we did today. And at the end, we have a cooking demonstrations that we've been doing live, but we can also explore different, you know, maybe hybrid doing recording and things like that. So just to demonstrate things that we do, so I baked some cookies today, and because Dr. Sabaté was gonna be here, so I included walnuts in these cookies. So it would be, approved by him. So this is just an example of, tasty, delicious, good-looking recipes that we can share with each other, because the point is that this would be a club where we all sharing, not just myself. So the recipes are provided, but we can also, we also have a Facebook page, so anybody's welcome to join. It's called Joy of Eating. So write it down and join us, where each one of us can share, different dishes that you're trying that you'd like to share with everybody. And I know Bianca, who is the main person, in charge. If you want to raise your hand, Bianca, so people can see who you are. Yeah, so she just, posted a beautiful picture of a quinoa with beans dish that we taught last session, and that she was able to make sure the recipe works. And she posted a beautiful picture, and she's bragging about the recipe now. So that's how the club works. So we invite all of you, if you haven't signed up yet, make sure you go to the website, and our next session is going to be the 3rd Thursday of April. And at each subsequent month, the sessions are always going to be the 3rd Thursday of the month from 4 to 5:30 Pacific time.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And Bianca, thank you so much for your help with this project as well. If you could put the link to Facebook on there. I just placed a link to the club on our website, but let's also get the Facebook link in there so folks can join either way. Now, I want to very quickly take you on a quick tour of our website so you can find the Joy of Eating Club and the resources we have on there. So I am going to share my screen, and here is the website. By the way, since we are here, in order to get the recording from today's webinar, you can just go to the top menu under Engage to Ministry Goal Series, and you will see it down there at the bottom of the page. It'll show up right here in the archives. But again, up here under Engage, you see the Joy of Eating Club here. So if you click on Joy of Eating Club, you'll find out our information here. And right here to the on the top right is information on how to join the club. You do need to create an account on our website. It's completely free. There's no tricks or anything involved. You will get on our email newsletter so that you get informed every time information comes out on our email newsletter. But that is also how you can get the information on how to attend the meetings. So if I do this and I go to my account, okay, click there. And now you have to set up an account. I already have a couple set up, so I'm going to pretend to log in here. You can click create an account if you don't have one yet. I'm going to log in, and it's going to take you to your personal account page. And right here where it says Joy of Eating Group, you click on Join Group, and then you're going to have just a few questions to answer. So it's that simple. You will then get an email when we are going to have our next meeting with information on how to join the club meeting. We meet on the 3rd Thursday of each month, again, with all the information that Maggie shared. Well, we have had just an amazing conversation today. Please feel free to share about the Joy of Eating Club with your church, your community. One of the things that we want you to do is to use it as a model. We are recording all the presentations that Maggie does so that you can even play those presentations at your church. You can form your own Joy of Eating Club, play her presentations, use the recipes. We share those on the website as well. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us. But we are going to go now to our Q&A session for just a few minutes. If any of you need to leave, we realize that maybe your time may be limited and you need to step out, please feel free to do so. but we have a few questions that have come in. If you have questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. I am going to ask Dr. Sabaté a couple of questions that I've noted down. First of all, we've had interest in seeing the report from the advisory committee. Is that also available on the website that you shared? And in particular, the chart that you were instrumental in putting together, are we able to access that?
Yes, the report is available. It has been available since July last year and is in the electronic form. I was promised that sometime in the future I will receive the paper form, but this is available. It's organized in chapters, and I show on the screen several pictures of how it is organized. So you can download the whole report, or you can download one chapter at a time, the way you would like. And the report, yes, contains if you go into the chapter that relates to food patterns, it has this table that I was instrumental in making.
Thank you. And the website again for that was dietaryguidelines.gov.
Correct. Yes, that's the generic one.
Okay, great. We had another question about fruits and vegetables. Do you think that they are still as nutritious today as they were 75 years ago, before we had GMOs and commercial fertilizers in heavy use? Has there been any change in the nutritional quality of our fruits and veggies?
There is some literature showing slightly differences in the nutrition concentration of some nutrients, but overall not very dramatic. So yes, it is true that the vegetables or the produce, as well as the trees and the fruit, if it's grown, or the legumes or the grains, whatever, the soil where they are produced, I mean, change slightly its composition. My area of expertise is in nuts, as you know, and I'm very familiar that the nutritional composition of the nuts grown, for instance, in France, in the walnuts, or the almonds in Spain, compared with the ones in California, there is almost no difference. I mean, even though the soil does change, and I mean, the genetic information that these seeds has is so powerful that, I mean, they develop with the same one. Personally, I prefer to eat not GMO foods, but that is not for nutrition reasons, it's more for philosophical, ethical reasons. But I don't think there is a dramatic difference as far as the nutrient is concerned.
Thank you very much. We also had a question about the 3 diets that were recommended or investigated as part of the process. Why was it that a vegan diet was not part of that recommendation or that evaluation process?
Wow, that's how many minutes do I have to answer this question? The committee this year did not recommend this diet. That was the previous 5 years ago. And the diets that were recommended were vegetarian, not specifically vegan. I think as advisory to the government, we have gone a long way from just a few years ago, when specifically the dietary guidelines were eat meat every day and eat dairy products every day. I think still there is the idea, and indeed exists data, that a vegan diet, I mean, is not complete as far as all the nutrients. Therefore, you have to take either an enriched food or a supplement. I think it's too much to ask that the Americans have to eat a vegan diet, given the current climates of scientific knowledge and political situation. I think a lacto-vegetarian diet is what is recommended by the government.
Thank you very much. it really goes to underscore that there are many, many different issues around the topic of making dietary recommendations. And we do keep in mind the context that we are all working in. So along those lines, what can you recommend to individual church members? How can we be a positive influence in this conversation about the dietary recommendations? As you showed, the Adventist line up there, and the US guidelines slowly creeping up towards it. So what can we do as an individual to be a positive influence?
Well, we eat for many reasons, as I emphasize, and people drink for many reasons. That's why there is this influence of, if you drink alcohol for health, stop drinking or don't start drinking. But people do drink alcohol for having a good time, for forget the problems. So the same, I'm using this as an example. When we eat, I mean, we have many reasons. We have the cultural background, we have our budget, we have our taste, we have our culture, we have many things. So I like the topic that you said, not the topic, the joy of eating club. I mean, we also eat for pleasure, and this is a reality. So in our diverse membership, each one comes from a different background, each one comes from a different perspective. I think we have to emphasize, I mean, the importance of eating well and giving general guidelines, but I mean, not trying to hammer everything in the heads of our members, because they are not going to enjoy it. That's one point. The second point is that you can have a decent, healthy diet, still including a little bit of flesh foods. So, I mean, sometimes we emphasize be vegetarian, and then the diet is full of refined foods, sugars, and so on and so forth, as if being the flesh is the only thing that we have to be careful. I think we have to see the different dimensions, the total amount of sugars, I mean, the saturated fat, and these empty calories that come from highly refined products. So I think we have to not just focus only on meat, no meat. And if somebody wants to eat or eats meat as a condiment, I mean, as a thing occasionally, I think, but improves in many other aspects of the diet, I mean, that could be a way to go for some. So I'm just trying to say, diet has multidimensional things as far as health. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that what do we want to do as far as the health ministry of the diet? Is just diet for better health? Or are we going to have diet for better receive, you know, to have a clarity of mind to better be in the communion with God? I think the latter is better. I mean, it's better to be in good spirits, be happy with the congregation, I mean, and slowly go and be in communion with God, than just making everybody vegetarian and be really upset in the church.
Thank you very much. I will add to that I have had my part in food wars in the past at churches, and I do regret it. It was a no gain for all involved. There are better ways to go about the conversations. So thank you for sharing.
And also, as I sit in the chats, I mean, in many of in America says ethnic churches, whether Brazilian or Filipino, whatever, because they mentioned this, that they serve meat in some, sorry, they serve. Some members brought dishes with meat. Now the things are going in the different direction. Is because of the youth. I mean, vegetarian diets and vegan diets are becoming popular. So the church, I mean, traditionally uses some potlucks with meat. I mean, it's going to go less and less because this is the trend of the society.
Thank you very much. And you also mentioned that sometimes we focus on one part of the diet that we miss some of the other important things, such as the added sugars. And we had a question from Bianca. Bianca, I'm actually going to ask you to unmute and clarify your question on the sweeteners, artificial sweeteners.
Sure. I noticed that on the guidelines, artificial sweeteners are recommended as like a potentially good alternative for people that struggle with added sugars and things like that. But I've also read some papers that talk about artificial sweeteners not being great for your health in terms of tricking you into how much you're eating or what you're eating and things like that. So could that recommendation potentially be harmful in any way?
I'm not an expert on these alternatives to sugar. Definitely, most of these alternatives to sugars are, I would say, products that has been developed with technology, and we don't know the effects 2 generations from now. Yeah, that is a recent thing. So since I'm not an expert and is a product that is man-made, I mean, I cannot say much about this. A thing is true that sugar is part of nature, and I think there are many sweet foods that are good. What is not good for health is to have refined added sugars, whether in the drinks or whatever. But I mean, to eat sugars in like dates or figs or foods that have, even if you eat a piece of bread and you keep in your mouth long enough, it's going to be converted into sweet. So I think this is part of nature. We cannot abuse that. That's why we had to be forced to put a limit that at the most 6% of added sugars. But there are, if you eat foods that are sweet, but they come from the nature, I mean, you can even go more than that.
Hey, thank you very much. I know we've had some great conversation in the chat as well. Does anyone have any further questions? Lorraine, yes, I see your hand. And you're still muted.
I just wanted to mention that we didn't discuss very much about one of the biggest problems, which is just too much calories, and just in general, whatever it is.
You are right. Do you know this maxima that was done by this San Francisco-based journalist? I forgot his name, but it says it summarized, I mean, all the scientific knowledge of nutrition in 7 words. 7 words. One is eat food, I mean real food, not too much, mostly plants. I think this summarized to me the essence of the nutrition. So we should eat foods as much as God created them or nature provides us. So real food, not man-made foods. Not too much means just what we need. And we are eating too much of the good food many times. And mostly plants. I mean, from the plant kingdom, not from the animal kingdom. I think this man was genius, a journalist. I mean, not a nutritionist, no PhDs in nutrition. But this guy has, to me, in 7 words, made the essence of what is good nutrition. I think if we're able to teach this to our churches, I mean, it's wonderful. Eat real food, not too much, mainly from the plant kingdom. That's it.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Any other questions? Well, I could stay talking with Dr. Sabaté, and I wouldn't mind all of you to listen in because I feel like I learn every time I speak to him. But I am going to let you all go. And as we close, I want to share just a final thought with you. When I think about health ministry and the health work, the health message, I always have to remember Isaiah 58, because it really does inform us in so many ways, not only the importance of what we do, but how we do it. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, where in verse 3 and 4, it talks about we fast. Okay, we're talking about diet, and fasting is part of the diet pattern. That we fast for strife and debate and so forth. And too often our churches can very easily fall into strife and debate when it comes to nutrition and diet and health in general. But I want to remind us of verse 8, where it says that, well, it begins that, you know, the message to us is to actually work on loosing bands of wickedness, undoing heavy burdens, let the oppressed go free. It's talking about the freedom and the life and the joy that we should be bringing to people. And then at verse 8, it says, then after we do this work, then your light shall break forth like the morning, your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. I want to all of us, you know, just always remember, is it the righteousness of Christ that is going before us in our conversations and in our interactions with others on the topic of diet, of health, whether it's with our fellow church members or even those in our community? Let's remember our main goal here is to show forth the righteousness of Christ. Thank you all so much for being with us, for being part of this vibrant conversation. Please continue to engage with us. This recording will be up in a few days. Please feel free to share it with others. And as we close, Dr. Sabaté, would you have a prayer of blessing on us?
A pleasure. Thank you, Lord, for these moments that we have been addressing the science and the conclusions of nutrition. But I want to thank you particularly for the many people that has been able to connect. Thanks for their ministry, for the motivation and interest in not only sharing the good news of nutrition, but also to make emphasis in the churches. We ask that you stay with them and you help in their ministry. In your name we pray. Amen.